Today we've got a special show, special little practical session for all of our accounting firms joining us and our accounting community, which is fantastic. Now, this is our Lunch and Learn workshop. If you don't know my name, it's Paul Jantz. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. And we are here thanks to Professional Partners Education and our wonderful supporters at Hall Chadwick, Profit Master Global Outsourcing, iKeep, and Lloyd's Auctions. Now, as I sort of slowly, as everyone else jumps in, I'll just give everyone a little bit of an update to, again, PPE or Professional Partners Education if you're joining us for the first time, because I know there's a number of firms that are joining us for the first time. Now, if you missed any of our content, now this content we produce for you guys, our accounting community, it's free of charge. It's all available to you, whether it's through this live version or the recorded versions as well. So if you missed anything for 2023, just type in Professional Partners Education into your YouTube browser and up will pop PPE TV Plus, and everything that we've done this year as well as last year is all there. And that includes my Empire Masterclasses that I run every month as well. That includes our podcasts and also obviously our Lunch and Learn workshops, which is more on the, call it the practical technical side of what we do. Now, it looks like we've got a few more joining us, which is awesome. So if you've just joined us, welcome. Now, our Lunch and Learn topic today takes, again, I mentioned this before, a little bit of a practical look at how all accounting firms can look to be a little bit more proactive with their clients in creating a solution before it becomes a problem. And I know if you guys have attended some of our lunches that we've had as well, Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, we've held our lunches. We often talk about how you as the accountant can be a little bit more proactive, especially in the space if there's been DPNs been issued. We know that there is a problem there. What are the sorts of things that you can do to be a little bit more creative and more solution focused? And that's what we're going to get in today. So there's plenty of warning signs out there for directors if they've been received, obviously if they've got tax debt, if they've got DPNs, and we're going to go into a little bit more detail about how we can help you. Now, let me introduce you to our special guests. It is our very own Andrew Crawley from Hall Chadwick. Andrew, how are you?
Well, thank you, Paul.
That's good, mate. Thanks for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Now, mate, before we kick off, let's share with everybody that's online your role at Hall Chadwick. I know it's an important one, a very important one. It resonates really well with our accounting firm community. You okay to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I'm a director with the group, the Hall Chadwick Group. I'm actually not a liquidator. It's sort of ironic that I work very closely with the insolvency area. Where I fit in mainly is actually as a advisory to directors that get into a lot of trouble. So generally, a client may be in trouble with liquidation and they come to Hall Chadwick because they're with somebody else and they didn't understand what they were getting into, and we might get them out of it. But where it's all sort of turned around a little bit, Paul, is that from a Hall Chadwick perspective, we believe that probably a better way to go about it is for the client and the accountant to speak with me in the first place on my division, but they actually will speak with me personally. And just to find out all the details around the director, so there's no surprises when he gets in there, because there's a lot of stuff happens in insolvency.
Can imagine. I think I think for the firms that we've been working with over the last X amount of years, I think that's what the firms enjoy, the fact that you come from a different angle and you share all the things that can be done as opposed to maybe just one option where some other practitioners may come from that way, isn't it? And I think that's a great thing.
I think it's very hard for I think it's easy for a director to go into insolvency and they believe when they're going to sign a form, it's all over. It's the beginning. And I spent most of my life protecting the directors after that. So it was interesting to join Hall Chadwick. It's just our view. Our view is let's get it over and done quickly. Let's make sure the directors know what they're up for. Let's make sure everybody understands it and get it done.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Now, Hall Chadwick is the #1 restructuring firm in Australia. We often talk about that at our lunches. And again, we go into detail. Today, we're going to talk about CVLs, we're going to talk about VAs, and we're going to talk about SBRs. So again, strap yourselves in, everyone, because we're going to go through a few things. Everyone will have the opportunity. You've got the Q&A bar there, or you've got the chat bar there as well. So if you want to ask a question, please don't be afraid. Throw any questions in there. Hopefully, we'll be able to provide you with enough information as well as provide you with some case studies as well, because I'm going to ask Andrew to go through a couple of case studies. So I think everyone sort of understands a little bit more about the the case studies and how their clients could be in a very similar situation, and how what we can talk about can be a little bit more practical and problem solving, I suppose. So let's get into that. Mel, mate, it's been a tough 24 to 30 months, I know, for company directors. We know the ATO is knocking. We know they're becoming a lot more proactive in collecting debt. So let's talk about some proactive solutions. Let's start with a CVL. First of all, what is a CVL, and how should firms go about identifying a potential problem with clients where this may apply?
Well, CVL is a creditor's voluntary liquidation. So effectively, it's the end of the road for the company, or that entity, if you like. A CVL is a liquidation. It ends the company. The liquidator does their job, and then the company is deregistered. But it's actually the starting point for a director. If you put something into CVL, then it opens up a whole lot of channels for the liquidator, which has to. The liquidators don't do anything wrong. They have a job to do, and their job is to work with within corporations law to identify anything the director's done in that throughout the company, and to find out if they've done anything wrong against corporations law, to see if it's cost the creditors any money. And then they have these rights of actions well beyond any other creditor to recover the money from the directors. So it's a simple product with very heavy ramifications.
So are there any things in there that we can go about for the firms listening, where we can identify some potential problems with clients, where that may apply, and how we can actually a little bit more creative?
Well, the thing is that I believe insolvency's changed post-COVID. I believe it's been changed significantly. I think it's more now about, it's going to sound crazy, but I think insolvency is very much about recovery of a business, or at least the recovery of the director in his personal life and his ability to conduct business. I think in the old days, CVLs were used very, very often, and I think most of the accountants listening would have seen what they call a legal phoenix, and I say legal because it's reality. Whereas companies would have been shut down, but the director has to still go on with his life. He may have then bought the assets of the company and traded on in a new entity. Now, those types of things still happen, and they can happen as long as they're done properly, and they're done either directly with the liquidator or through a law firm. I would recommend very strongly against going outside of those two channels. If you're an accountant thinking about any of that, and I'd love you to call me and I'll talk you through it with my views on that. You don't need to go ahead with us, but I'll talk you through it anyway. I think the biggest issue is the account is going into it. We've got the basic stuff that everyone knows about, which is your 7A loans and issues like that. Once you get into a liquidation, the liquidator has no choice but to deal with a 7A loan or an uncommercial transaction where a director may have taken money from the company without putting it through the BAS. That will then become a loan or being added to a 7A loan. These are important issues. Other issues are the assets within the firm and the company. Often within the small companies, you will find that the directors may have their wives' cars, their daughters' cars, and all sorts of things within the company. And all these things can be dealt with. It's just that they need to be qualified prior to going into it, so that you're not arguing with the director afterwards. And the other thing that's very important about a CVL that nobody ever talks about, and I'm surprised they don't, people ask questions about a director's credit after a liquidation. Well, what people forget is the director's credit within the liquidation, because once you sign the form, it's the start of the liquidation. Now, these CVLs can remain open, even a small one can remain open for 2 or 3 years if matters aren't resolved. Now, within that period, whilst there's an open liquidation, you're not going to be able to lease a car or do anything. And the simple fact is, because all of the creditors, all of the lenders rather, all know that whilst the CVL is open at any point in time, a liquidator can make a claim directly on a director. So again, this is where, and if you don't mind me saying at Hall Chadwick, and why I'm brought into the area, is that we identify all of this beforehand. So the director and the accountant know exactly what we're doing on the way in. They know what to expect. They know how it's going to happen. That enables us to get in, shut it down, and close the file off very quickly. And once with the director, then you're back onto your normal credit issues. Now, you're still going to have some credit issues with tier 1 banks having a liquidated company, but that's just an explanation sort of thing.
Yeah.
So once you get in there, mate, there's a lot of exposure. We need to know it before we go in.
Yeah, man. And look, that's one of the things, and I know the feedback that I get from a number of the firms within our community that we work with is exactly that. And I think you mentioned it. A lot of the firms don't have a problem in picking up the phone and saying, hey, Andrew, I've got a potential problem with a client. Can we have a chat about it? Or maybe can you have a chat to the client about it? it doesn't cost the firm anything to have that chat and say, look, this is what is on the table. This is what we can do. This is what you're potentially facing. I think it comes from a different angle having you in the role at Hall Chadwick, doesn't it?
I think the angle I come from is either protecting the director or enabling the director to move forward. So to be perfectly honest with you, my starting point is the director and his family.
Yes.
Now that if a liquidator, and not, again, I'm not criticising liquidators who've had a barbecue on Saturday, it'd be full of liquidators. They're great blokes. But at the end of the day, what these liquidators have to do, it can be, they don't get a choice of how to deal with things in a lot of occasions. They can be commercial, but my starting point is always whether there's a family home, what the director's intention is. You know, is his intention, he's not going to stop work at 40 years old, and nor should he. And conversely, he shouldn't be operating an insolvent company either. So something has to happen.
Yep. And I think you mentioned the key thing there being the family home. A lot of directors, husband and wife, the wife may not know what is actually going on within the company. But the biggest thing that she's going to fear is possibly losing a family home.
And the problem is they don't find it out till halfway through the insolvency.
Yep.
You know, when they see things, it's too late. They can't do. They have to do what they have to do.
Yep, 100%. Well done, mate. Let's get into VA. I know a lot of directors hear the word administration, voluntary administration, and they tend to sort of call it a little bit of panic stations go into play, which is fair enough as well. But what's the benefits of a VA, and why would directors consider this type of action?
I think a VA is the most wonderful product in insolvency. Personally, the purpose of a VA is an act of insolvency, but the purpose is to give the company its best opportunity to continue forward. So the ideal scenario from a VA is a voluntary administration. The ideal scenario from a voluntary administration is that the company never gets liquidated. You would go into the voluntary administration. You may have a number of creditors. The administrator will take over the company's finances for a period of time, generally 6 to 8 weeks. In that period, they'll do a forensic audit and they'll work with the director to see if the company could go forward under a different type of arrangement. So, for example, a company might owe $5 million, but after the audit, we might establish that they could go ahead if they didn't repay that $5 million. They only repaid $1 million of it, and even then, they did it over a year. Now, if the administrator, because don't forget, they're forensic accountants, they can show the creditors that if they allow this to happen, then the business will continue. They're going to get whatever it is, 20 cents on the dollar on their credit. They're going to have a client going forward in a better class of business. Now, they won't do this for the director if the director talks to them. But when they speak at a creditors meeting, when it's explained to them that there are your two options. One is that you accept 20 cents on the dollar on your current debt and you give them a year to pay it and we let them trade on. Two is it goes into liquidation and you get nothing, because they're really the only two ways it's coming out of VA.
Yeah.
So the whole point about a voluntary administration is it's there to ensure the company continues. Paul, just add one more thing. What we're also doing is a lot of voluntary administrations that may even have a different purpose. So, for example, there may be horrible director disputes going on in the business. Maybe we've got one going at the moment, actually, which if you don't mind, I'll mention it later.
No,
but we've got one going at the moment. So there's director disputes that are preventing a business being sold simply because of the relationships, and it's just, it's got out of control. It's dysfunctional. So we take it. They appointed Hall Chadwick as the administrators. We take over the whole process. We remove the directors from the process, even though we're keeping them in the loop. We conduct the whole sale process, and we distribute the money once we sold all the business. So that's worked really, really well. You can even use a VA, and we've done this a few times, and this is the one that I like. I really do like, where an accountant might have thought, and rightly so, that the company can't continue. So the only chance is to liquidate it. And that brings into play in a liquidation all of those issues that the liquidator has to deal with the director. But you could actually put a company, provided there's a little bit of money, you could put it into voluntary administration, even though it's not going to continue. And at the end of the voluntary administration, we could say, well, there's going to be a deed of company arrangement or a DOCA that pays out only 3 or 4 cents in the dollar or something of that nature, and have the creditors agree to it all, which we probably would. And then we hand the empty company back to the director. He goes back to his accountant. He says, well, here it is. There's no money owing. Deregister the company. So you've completely avoided the whole liquidation process and all the exposures to it.
Yeah, well done. Are there any other great case studies that you've worked with that have also been beneficial to company directors?
Well, we've got, there are a number, but without boring you too much. So the one that I told you about is, well, I pretty much told you about it. We had directors arguing, and it was horrible. To be honest with you, the police were involved. One director threatened to kill the other two. It just got completely out of control. And it was an accounting firm that brought us into it. And I personally went and spoke to all three directors. One of the directors, the one that was causing, well, sorry, my apologies, the ones that the other two directors said was causing all of the trouble, didn't want a bar of me. He didn't want anything to do with me. He just wouldn't tolerate anything I said. The other two directors were able to put the company into voluntary administration because it was 2 or 3 directors. After it happened, and there was a bit of argy-bargy for a week, I've gone back to that director, and now all 3 directors are all on side. They're not talking to each other, but they're talking to us, right? And in fact, the main point of anger was coming from the so-called bad director. The main point of anger is he thought he was going to be cut out in the sale process when he wanted to retain the business. As it turns out, he's buying the business. He is going to buy it. He's going to end up with it all. But and that's fine because the other 2 directors wanted out of it as well. But everybody just wanted to know it had been done above board.
Yep.
And that's where the administration process came in.
Yep.
And it was terrific, that one. I'll just mention the thing about a voluntary administration is the administrator has got amazing powers once it goes into voluntary administration. And as we all know, the building sector's probably the one going through the most upheaval at the moment.
Yep.
And we've got one going on at the moment where there's a construction firm that only has 7 projects. Now, mostly when you get the domestic residential stuff, there's 70, 100, 150 houses being built. This is a commercial builder, so there are only 7 projects, but they're significant. Now, but those 7 projects, 4 of them, through lots of things, through union delays, through the rise of prices, they simply couldn't complete 4 of the 7 jobs. They would have had to use all the funds from the existing good 3 jobs to complete the other 4. So they were advised that it needed to go into liquidation, but they came to us. What we elected to do is we elected to trade the company on through a voluntary administration, but we used our powers to go and talk to the 4 contracts that weren't viable. And we explained to them that we had the builder provide us with the information that we could continue and we could finish the jobs, but there'd be an increase in price. Would they like to go out and see if they wanted alternative arrangements? So those 4 went out and they did do alternative arrangements because there was too much bad blood already between the existing company. And we were able to terminate those contracts, and then anything left over in those contracts simply became an unsecured creditor in the VA, if you like, and I'll explain that in a moment. So the other 3 contracts, however, they were able to move forward, right? 2 of them had a minor cost adjustments and 1 of them none at all. So this company that was on its knees moved forward after the administration. We put through a deed of company arrangement, or a DOCA, and the company moved forward with just those 3 contracts. And in the end of it, as the unsecured creditors, those other 4, they actually voted for the DOCA. So if you're looking at how you want to do things and how you want to get out of it, there are ways. But if I could just say something and do an ad for Hall Chadwick, is that what people don't understand is in a voluntary administration, if these administrators trade a business, in the period of the trading, the period of administration, they're personally liable for all costs. So wages, petrol, telephones, everything. So you've got to have a company. And for that reason, I believe, for that reason, a lot of other companies will rush into putting a company into liquidation from a VA. Our company does not view it like that, right? We trade on more VAs, in my opinion, than anyone else in the country. And we trade on VAs if we can see a resolution at the end. We'll give the director a chance to come out, even though we're on the hook for most of it through the period.
Yep. Well said, mate. Well said. Look, I know a number of firms that I speak to a lot of firms every day, and I know firms like when you talk about SBRs, and they like that as an option. So let's go into that for a second. And I know they've been very popular with a number of our firms as well. So let's talk about the benefits of a small business restructure.
To the director, because there's none to us. They're very inexpensive to do. It's an amazing tool. So a small business restructure it's been around for about 18 months, nearly 2 years, but no one ever used it till post-COVID. What it allows to do, if a company has less than $1 million in debt, and that's including secured debt, less than $1 million in total debt, you can look at coming to a restructure firm, ours, for example, to do what they call an SBR. Now, the SBR is virtually a tiny little voluntary administration, but there's a couple of key differences. With the SBR, the directors maintain control of everything. We don't touch their bank accounts. We have no control over their business. They retain control of the business, albeit debts are frozen immediately while we do our stuff. So we still do the forensic audit. We still work with the directors to see how a debt might be able to be restructured and move forward. And then we still submit it to the creditors for approval. Now, the thing about the SBR though, is generally with an SBR, one of the major creditors will always be the ATO and tax. The ATO, I'm speaking openly because I'm telling the truth, but the ATO appears to, well, they've taken a view on this, that the SBR is a great tool, particularly if it can save a job. So you might only have 2 or 3 employees, but if there's 2 or 3 employees and a case is put forward to the ATO to vote for something absurd like 10 cents in the dollar or 15 cents in the dollar on a $300,000 or $400,000 ATO debt, if it's going to save an employee, and if we can show the business will move forward, and generally you can with an SBR, then they'll lead the voting on those sort of rates. So we've had a number of SBRs, Paul, I can't believe, we've had a number of SBRs that have gone through for 10 and 12 cents in the dollar, where the creditors have had to vote on it. It was led by the ATO to get that. Most people will sit back and go, well, hang on, you've had a legitimate firm, whether it be Hall Chadwick or someone else, put it forward, put the bona fides forward. You've had the Commonwealth government accept the bona fides and moving forward with it. So we're going to vote for it as well. Right. So what happens then is quite different to the VA, is simply there's a meeting held. It's only a 20-day period from when they first sign on to it. And when at the time that we make the offer, there's one more qualification. Well, 2. At the time we make the offer, they've got to make sure that all of the BASs and the tax is lodged, not up to date, but the ATO wants to know what the extent of the full liability is. So that's fine. All the accounting firms listing will take care of that. Yep. And the other thing is, and this is where we've had a problem on a couple of occasions, but the other thing is on that 20th day before we lodge the arrangement or the potential arrangement, all of the employment benefits that are due have to be paid. And by that, we're talking about super. Yep. Because quite often, I had one the other day where there was $600,000 in debt. And I don't know how, but there was 320 of it was super. I don't even know how it got to there. This guy wanted to restructure $600,000 worth of debt. And I explained to him, no, you can't. You can only restructure 280. You've got to pay the 320 before we even put the submission. But generally, it's not an issue, and it's a great tool, and it's got minimal, if any, effect on your credit. And it's just amazing.
Yeah, brilliant. And sort of what I love about that is it's the old scenario of what you don't know, you don't know. So when you talk about an SBR being so good and not been on your record and all these little things that can take place, it's very, very good tool for all of our firms listening to this to actually look at it and say, right, should I start talking to some of my clients about a potential small business restructure?
What I find amazing, and the participants here will know more than I do about this, but what I find amazing is what I'm seeing is where accounting firms are going to the ATO with a genuine case that if they varied if they waived penalties or whatever it might be, or gave an extended repayment period, that their client may get out of it. They say no to that, but then they say yes to 10 cents in the dollar if it goes through an SBR. I don't understand the logic of it, but there's obviously one beyond my comprehension.
Yeah, no, I agree. It doesn't make sense at all. But again, as another alternative, because you're right, there's a lot of different restructure packages out there that get knocked back by the ATO, and yet they're accepting 10 cents or 12 cents here. So
yep, it's just the way they do it at the moment.
Yeah. So, mate, given our community, there are accounting firms we work with throughout the country, which is fantastic, and they obviously have a number of clients. What are some of the warning signs that are out there for accounting firms to identify with their particular clients that they may need to chat to you about?
Well, getting back to what I just said then, okay. So if you would have asked me that question before COVID, I would have said to you a DPN or a stat demand. Right. Maybe a statement of claim, maybe. But post-COVID, when there's so much, the government's doing so much and insolvency so much about the recovery of a business, I personally think an accountant should look at talking to us when they're looking at going into an ATO payment arrangement. And my logic on that is that what we're finding, or what I've found, actually, no, in my experience, a number of companies that go into the ATO payment arrangements, all of a sudden they haven't been paying tax for 2 years. Well, they've got to start paying tax, which is a knock around at the beginning. Then they've got to repay the money that they've already paid. And I find a year later, they they fall over and then they're in real trouble. If you're going into an ATO repayment arrangement, I would think that itself is qualification to go into an SBR. And the SBR, or the small business restructure. So, if you've got a $300,000 tax debt, but your company owes $700,000, that should go into an SBR. It should be done. The ATO will most likely support the SBR, provided it's done with the right firm and done properly. And rather than the payment arrangement moving forward, you might pay 15 cents on the dollar on all of your debts and have a little bit of time to pay it. You can go up to 3 years on your repayments, but if you can repay it within a year, it resolves everything. The company can move forward. So it's just a way of cleaning it up. And again, I want to stress that the SBR doesn't have the smell of a VA or a CVL. It's supported by the government, and it's some really good results coming out of it.
Just makes sense, doesn't it? There'll be, because the challenge for most businesses I suppose they've got the old tax debt, plus they've got the current tax debt. So it's a bit of a compounding effect that just strips cash flow out of the business. Yeah,
well, so in my experience, with the smaller firms, when they're going into the payment arrangements, they just, the participants here will know more than me, but they tend to get in trouble again. And there might be ways around it. Now, Paul, just on the other thing is that outside of that and going back to the traditional ones like the VA and the CVL, then look, the button pressing time tends to be when there's litigation or a DPN, but your accountants know full well, and I know firsthand it's very hard for an accountant. You can't sell insolvency. If the director doesn't want to hear it, doesn't believe it, you're not going to be able to sell it to him. So if the director isn't become self-aware through his conversations with his account that he's in trouble, then it gets to the litigation. But if you can get in prior to the litigation, then the VA is a wonderful scenario that could have everything going forward and protect the director and his family, because if you go through a VA and come out as a docker, there's no rights of actions by the administrator to chase them personally. Nothing. It's all over and done with. It forgives all the sins of the past, including the 7A loans. Yeah.
Interesting. Look, I've got a lot of things going through my head, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the lines up. So to all of you guys that are online, we know there's quite a few of you here. If you've got any questions, if you can throw that into the chat bar, please. There's no questions at the moment. If you want to throw it into the Q&A, or if you want to throw it into the chat bar, please ask anything. Again, this is for you guys. So these lunch and learn workshops, I know a number of firms have got their team members in boardrooms as well, which is fantastic, because any sort of client-facing accountant, this is great learning. So, and exactly what Andrew went through with all the different options that are available before it gets too late, I think it's fantastic. Mate, while we're waiting for any questions that may come through, are there any other case studies that you'd like to share with anyone?
The CVLs, there are a number of, again, this gets back to understanding what the director wants to see beforehand, or wants to occur beforehand. So we've had a CVL that I like to tell accountants about, even though the accountant didn't make any money out of this, but it's just one that I'm very proud of. Whereas a husband and wife came to us in their late 60s, and he was a doctor, and he was working predominantly. They had to set up a company for the last 3 years because he was working for medical centres, and all the money went into the company, and they just took it out. It's quite strange. Some of the better educated people are less aware. So they just took all the money out, and some $700,000 has been taken out, and they were retiring. And this poor fellow, unfortunately, was diagnosed with cancer and was going to be leaving his wife alone in the not too distant future. And they had a house, and the house was worth $850,000, and all he wanted to do was protect her. And they knew that if their accountant had told them, and correctly, that, okay, well, what we should do is bring up all the tax to date and lodge it. And that's going to create a tax liability. Well, we can then liquidate it. But of course, the problem is you hadn't put your BASs in on time through the period. So there remains the exposure where the ATO may look to claim directly from the director. So just to explain that, I know the accountants know it, but if you don't lodge your BASs on time, forget about paying them, or you don't lodge them within 30 days, then the ATO can make that a deemed DPN. So for that period, they can actually go after the director personally. So the way that we dealt with it all is we simply took the company and we put every cent down as a loan. So there were no wages paid for the period. So for the 3 years, no wages were paid, no BAS had been done. So we put them down as loans equally to each other. I think there was 350 or 380 to each of them. We were able, because there's a property, of course, it's an asset of the company, we've still got to deal with it responsibly. The couple was selling the current house and the wife was going to move into a smaller house. And we settled the entire arrangement as a loan for $700. We settled for about $100,000. So the whole $700,000 they took, we were able to settle for the 100, and the wife could buy the home she wanted. And it's one of the proudest things I've ever done, because they were crying when they gave us gifts.
Yeah.
As I said, with the case studies, as long as you know what you want and what you want to achieve,
yep.
Just come and sit down, have a talk. I'm national, so I'll come to your offices and sit down. I'm in most states every week. I've got a team in every. I have a team in every state, but I prefer to have that first discussion myself for this reason. It's the reason you've heard today. Always available on the phone. I'll tell you what I would like to do though, Paul. I don't know if it's possible. I've got a great little pamphlet on the SBR. It's only a one page. It's a one page. It's only about 3 paragraphs, but it's structured for some of the accountants that have asked me to give them some information. Yeah. It'd be great if we could send something out to all the participants. It's just a little one pager that they can show their clients.
Done. I think it's I look, again, I always come back to that saying of what you don't know, and the ability to provide that to everybody online. I think will be awesome, so hopefully you guys don't mind. You'll get a follow-up email from us with that little pamphlet just outlining the SBR, the small business restructure, and you can have a look at that and say, if my clients do have a payment plan in place with the ATO, is it worth having a chat to them and then having a chat to Andrew about a possible small business restructure, which is going to, again, you're being proactive, you're bringing them options. They might think that's the only option, which is to be in a payment plan, which most of us do as business owners. That's probably what we think. But what other options in place? And that's the beauty of what we do and what you do in particular. So thanks for that. So hopefully to everyone online, that's okay. We'll send it out to you following this session, and you can decide whether you want to talk to your clients or not, and then obviously call Andrew, and whether it's by Zoom or whether it's on the phone or whatever it may be. If you're in Melbourne, I know Andrew's in Melbourne, but he travels a lot. So I think Danny keeps you pretty busy, mate.
She does. Yeah.
Which is brilliant. There's no questions. So there's no questions, which is fantastic. So again, if you've got something you'd like to ask Andrew, please do so. Are you active on LinkedIn, mate?
Active. I'm big on it. I just don't know how to get into it. No. So my preference is you do it through an email or give me a call.
All right. So what we'll do is don't go to Andrew through LinkedIn. I'm glad I've cleared that up. So
no. I'm going to fix it. I've got 8,000, whatever you call them, friends. Yeah. All business owners.
Okay. Good.
Don't use it. So I'll get it active again.
So what we'll do is on the email we send out as well, which will probably come from Danny, it'll be Andrew's details there as well. So if you've got any questions that you want to go one-on-one, and again, to you guys as our accounting community, this doesn't cost you anything. Okay. So the ability to have a conversation with Andrew and to chat to your client and work through solutions, I think is just another, bow that you can add to your armor of going to your clients and saying, look, this is what we do, but this is an additional thing that you can have a look at. So please do that. Andrew, any closing comments, mate, before we wrap up?
Just on that one, which is the biggest trap for directors, and it's nobody's fault, is that they believe if they're talking to a liquidator or anyone that suggests they can help with insolvency, they're led to believe once they sign a form, they pay an amount of money. Could be $5,000 or $10,000. They think it's over. It's not over. It's just the start. You need to know what's going to happen afterwards. Right. That's what you need to know. So forget about the initial money, whether it's 5, 10, we'll do it for nothing if there's something in it. I can tell if there's going to be claims, and we'll discuss with the director. So why charge money on the way in? Why do that? That's almost double dipping.
Yep. Well said, mate. Well said. Well, what a great little session. To all of you guys that have joined us, thank you for joining us. Andrew, thank you for giving us your time and the information, the knowledge, the case studies. Everything is just seamless to me. And I think the way that our community can start working closer with their clients. And I've always been a big advocate of making sure it's just having different conversations. They're not necessarily financial conversations, but a different conversation with your clients. And we know that there's a number of directors and companies out there that could be in trouble, and these are just options. So thanks, mate. I really appreciate it. Before you guys go, just a quick plug for my next masterclass. So our next Empire masterclass session, it is next, is it next Tuesday? No, it's the following. So it's July 20. And I'm talking with if you're into AFL, and I know I'm a big Carlton boy, so ex-CEO of the Richmond Football Club, Melbourne Football Club, Fremantle Football Club, and general great guy as well. So he does a lot of leadership coaching. His name's Cameron Swab, pretty famous again, the surname Swab within the AFL community. So we're going to be talking about leadership at the highest level and some of the stuff he's done. I've done a lot of his mentoring courses as well. And very rarely do would our community get access to someone like this for an hour. So he's jumping online with me for a special hour at 12 p.m. on July 20. If you haven't seen the invite yet, let me know. We'll jump on my LinkedIn page and you can definitely find it. It's a free masterclass about leadership at the highest level. So Andrew Crawley, thank you again to all of our firms. Thank you again. Till I see you guys next time. Have a great day. Thanks, Andrew.
Cheers, mate. All the best.
Cheers.